This baby triplets were found by the roadside of a small town in Minnesota in 1981. But a shocking event happened 19 years later which made their real mother surface. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Sit back and enjoy this story as it unfolds. On a quiet Minnesota highway, truck driver Harold Kemp noticed something unusual along the road shaped strangely still. At first, Harold assumed they were animals caught in the cold. But as he slowed and looked at the scene critically, horror seized him. Three newborn bobbies, two boys and a girl, lay huddled together in bassinet. Their faint cries struggled against the howling wind, fragile and desperate. Harold leapt from his truck, trembling. He hovered over them before instinct finally took hold. He removed his jacket, covering their tiny bodies and shielding them, then frantically called for help. Minutes later, an ambulance and police cars arrived and paramedics rushed the infants to safety while officers searched the area for any trace of the mother. Footprints, clothing, tire marks. But the storm had erased everything. The discovery reached national headlines within hours. Three newborn bobbies found on the highway. Millions were stunned. Who would leave three newborns beside a highway? How long had they been out there? And where was their mother? At the hospital, nurses worked relentlessly to warm the infants and stabilize their fragile heartbeats. Miraculously, all three survived. The staff, moved by their resilience, affectionately named them the Miracle Triplets, a title that quickly spread throughout the town. Before the world ever heard of the Miracle Triplets, there was Veronica, 19, soft-spoken, and carrying the weight of adulthood long before she was ready. She lived in a cramped two-room apartment with her widowed mother and two younger siblings in a quiet Minnesota town where opportunity rarely knocked and poverty never stopped breathing down your neck. Veronica had always been the responsible one. She worked nights as a cleaner in the mansion of the Prestons, one of the wealthiest families in the region. Mr. Preston, a powerful businessman, had 4 children, 2 daughters who were polite but distant, and 2 sons whose names were whispered with caution. The oldest, Brandon, was known for his arrogance and his reckless behavior. His younger brother, Tyler, followed him like a shadow, mirroring every vice and every cruel amusement the older one possessed. Still, Veronica did her work quietly, grateful for the income that helped keep a roof over her family's heads. She avoided the boys whenever possible, always keeping her eyes down and her distance wide. But trouble has a way of finding those least prepared for it. One late afternoon, as she dusted the study room, Veronica realized too late that she was not alone. Brandon stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He smiled, an unsettling, predatory smile that made Veronica's heart grip in fear. "You work too hard," he said, stepping toward her. "Relax a little." She backed away instinctively, clutching her cleaning cloth like a shield, but there was nowhere to run. Within seconds, the atmosphere turned suffocating. Brandon cornered her, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. She tried to push him away, tried to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth. The struggle was short, brutal, and devastating. When it was over, Veronica was left trembling and broken on the floor while Brandon fixed his shirt as casually as if nothing had happened. Before leaving, he leaned close to her and hissed, "Say a word and you'll regret it. I'll make sure you lose this job and everything else." From that day on, Veronica moved through life like a ghost, her silence chained by fear. She continued working, unable to quit because her family depended on her income. She avoided Brandon, avoided eye contact, avoided breathing too loudly. Nobody in her family suspected a thing. Weeks passed. Then one morning she woke up vomiting. At first she blamed the stress, the exhaustion, the skipped meals. But as her symptoms persisted, dread pooled in her stomach. She bought a cheap pregnancy test, took it in the cramped bathroom at home, and watched the 2 lines appear, bold, merciless, undeniable. She felt the world fall out from under her. When she confronted Brandon, he didn't even flinch. He shrugged, smirked, and said, "That's not my problem, handle it." But things took a darker turn when Veronica returned to work one evening and accidentally overheard Brandon arguing with Tyler in the kitchen. Their voices were sharp, irritated. "You need to get rid of her before she runs her mouth," Tyler said. "She won't," Brandon replied. "She knows better." "Then give her something that makes sure of it. Slip it in her drink, problem solved." Veronica froze behind the wall, her heart pounding so violently she feared it would give her away. Tyler lowered his voice, but she heard enough. Prescription pills that could force a miscarriage, crushed and hidden in a drink. That night she barely slept. She clutched her stomach, whispering apologies to the tiny life growing inside her. She felt trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The next day, Brandon approached her with sudden kindness, unnerving, unnatural kindness. He told her he accepted the pregnancy and wanted them to celebrate the good news. Then he poured a drink into 2 glasses, shielding his hand as he pretended to stir. But Veronica wasn't fooled. She saw it just for a second, the small white pill slipping from his fingers into her cup. Her blood ran cold. She took the glass, raised it to her lips as if preparing for a sip, then suddenly pressed a hand to her mouth and rushed toward the bathroom, gagging. Brandon laughed, assuming morning sickness had saved him from waiting. While she locked herself inside, trembling violently, Veronica knew one thing with absolute clarity. If she stayed one more day in that house, neither she nor her unborn child would survive. Veronica shut the bathroom door and slid to the floor, shaking as her heart pounded with raw survival fear. Outside, Brandon paced, waiting for her to return and drink from the cup he had prepared. But she had already decided. She would leave, not tomorrow, not after planning, but now. She washed her face, steadied her trembling hands, and stepped out, clutching her stomach. "I'm not feeling well. I need to go home," she whispered. Brandon studied her, irritation flickering before he put on his fake tenderness. "Go rest. We'll celebrate tomorrow." But he had no idea she was escaping. After leaving the Preston mansion, Veronica didn't go home. She walked past her bus stop, past familiar streets, pushing through pain and cold as every noise made her flinch. Going home would endanger her family. The Prestons would look for her there first. By nightfall, she reached a rundown bus station on the edge of town. With the last of her money, she bought a one-way ticket to a town she didn't know. At midnight, she boarded the bus, clutching her thin jacket and the life growing inside her. As Minnesota faded behind her, she whispered goodbye. By morning, she was gone without a trace. The Prestons didn't notice her missing, but her mother did. Veronica had never stayed out overnight. Within hours, worry turned to panic. Her siblings searched the streets, her mother waited by the phone, staring out the window every night, praying her daughter would return. But Veronica's room remained untouched, bed made, Bible on the nightstand, silence heavy. Rumors spread, but her mother felt the truth. Veronica was in danger. A missing person report brought no leads. Veronica had vanished like a shadow swallowed by night. Months passed, snow fell, melted, seasons changed, yet still nothing. Her mother kept her room exactly the same, windows slightly open as if leaving a path for her return. But Veronica was far away, hiding and surviving, living only for the child she had sworn to protect, even if it meant disappearing forever. Veronica's journey led her far from the familiar landscapes of Minnesota. She drifted from town to town, taking small cleaning jobs, sleeping in cheap motels or shelters, and praying each night for strength. As her pregnancy advanced, so did her fear. She knew the Prestons had money, influence, and pride. They could find her if they wanted to. And if they found her, she doubted they would allow her or her unborn child to survive the truth she carried. By her 8th month, the weight of the baby inside her was almost unbearable. Her body ached endlessly, her back throbbed, her feet swelled, and exhaustion draped itself around her like a heavy blanket. She finally settled in a quiet rural town that seemed forgotten by the world. There, tucked between deserted farmhouses and winding dirt roads, She found a small clinic run by an elderly couple who provided care for little cost. They didn't ask many questions, something Veronica was grateful for. On a cold morning, long before the sun could warm the sky, her labor pains began. The contractions came fast, sharp, and merciless. The clinic staff rushed her into a small delivery room as Veronica gripped the sheets, her cries filling the narrow hallway. Hours dragged by like an eternity. Then, at last, three tiny cries echoed through the room, triplets, two boys and a girl, perfect, innocent, fragile. They placed the bobbies on her chest, their bodies warm but trembling, their fingers curling instinctively around hers. Veronica stared at them, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, just a moment, the world softened. She felt love in its purest form, a love frightening in its intensity, but with the love came overwhelming fear. How would she feed them? Where would they sleep? What if the Prestons found out? What if Brandon came after her? She had no money, no home, no stability, not even enough strength to stand without wobbling. The clinic had no resources to keep her and the newborns long. The elderly nurse whispered, "You're a strong girl, dear. You'll figure it out." But Veronica knew she wouldn't. After leaving the clinic, she found herself walking aimlessly along the old highway, her bobbies bundled in a bassinet. Dawn was approaching. She reached a secluded area near a roadside. Her legs buckled. She sank to her knees, sobbing so violently she couldn't breathe. The triplets cried softly, unaware of the storm inside their mother's heart. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she whispered, pressing her forehead against theirs. She kissed each tiny face, memorizing them as if trying to tattoo their existence onto her soul. Her hands shook as she placed them gently on the median strip in the middle of the highway. I pray someone finds you. Someone better than me. Someone who can give you life." Her voice cracked under the weight of a kind of heartbreak words were never meant to hold. Then she stood, turned away, and ran. She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she would crawl back to them, hold them, and destroy all hope they had of a safer future. She ran until her body crumbled to the ground miles away, sobbing into the dirt. When the sun finally rose, Veronica made a decision she would carry like a scar for the rest of her life. She would live with the guilt, but at least her children might live at all. A month after giving birth, Veronica returned home. Her mother nearly collapsed when she walked through the door. Her siblings clung to her as if she were a ghost resurrected. They asked where she had been, what had happened, why she had vanished. But Veronica simply shook her head with a tight smile and said she had been away, figuring things out. She never mentioned the pregnancy, never spoke of the triplets, never confessed the ache that lived in her heart every single day. She carried her secret alone, not knowing that one day, 30 years later, fate would force her to confront the children she had tried so desperately to protect. A wealthy couple, Daniel and Margaret Lawson, had spent years trying and failing to have children. When they heard about the abandoned triplets, something inside Margaret stirred. She insisted on seeing them. Daniel, equally hopeful, agreed. The moment the couple entered the orphanage nursery, the bobbies reacted as if they recognized them. One reached out, another smiled, the third stopped crying instantly. That moment sealed everything. The Lawsons signed the adoption papers within weeks, naming them Eli, Emmanuel, and Alora. They raised them in a warm home filled with books, laughter, and endless encouragement. The children grew up smart, charismatic, and almost magically connected. Teachers often called them the inseparable trio. But there was something else, something the Lawsons couldn't explain. When Eli was 11, he collapsed suddenly at school. Emmanuel and Alora felt it instantly. Both clutched their chests and cried out, even though they were miles away. Doctors later discovered Eli had a rare neurological condition. Months later, Emmanuel developed the exact same symptoms, and then Alora. Tests showed the condition was genetic, something inherited. But Margaret and Daniel carried no such genes. The triplets began asking quiet questions. Why don't we look like anyone in the family pictures? How come none of us have dad's eyes or mom's nose? Margaret always smiled, always changed the subject, always prayed they wouldn't dig too deeply. She feared the truth, not because she was ashamed, but because she was terrified of losing them. Then came the winter of their 19th year, the season everything changed. Snow fell hard that evening, covering the world in a white silence. The triplets were driving home from a holiday event, their laughter rising like warm breath inside the car. Emmanuel was teasing Ulrika about her terrible singing when the car hit a patch of black ice. In seconds, the car spun wildly across the snowy highway, headlights cutting through darkness like frantic signals. Eli shouted, Ulrika screamed. Emmanuel grabbed the wheel with both hands. The car slammed into a guardrail, rolled twice, and slid into a ditch. Silence followed. Cold, heavy, terrifying silence. Pesquezba rushed to the scene, calling emergency services. The triplets were pulled out one by one, bloodied, unconscious, and frighteningly pale. Their bodies, so often full of energy and mischief, lay still like abandoned dolls. Margaret Lusson collapsed in tears when she saw them. Daniel stood frozen. He knew this moment was coming, the moment when everything they had hidden, everything they had protected, would finally rise to the surface. For as the triplets lay unconscious, the hospital prepared to run deep genetic tests. Tests that would reveal the truth the Lussons had never spoken. The crash became the kind of tragedy small towns never forget. The Lusson triplets were known and loved. Their accident felt like a wound cut directly into the heart of the community. Inside the emergency ward, doctors rushed between rooms. Two of the triplets, Emmanuel and Ulrika, had survived with surprisingly minor injuries. Bruised, shaken, but conscious. But Eli, the calmest of the trio, the one who always laughed last but laughed the hardest, he was fighting for his life. His lungs were failing. Internal bleeding was worsening. His pulse flickered like a flame struggling against the wind. The doctors informed their parents, but the words hit like a hammer. He needs an emergency blood transfusion, immediately. Margaret Lusson grabbed Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his skin. We're here, she sobbed. We're right here. Take ours, take mine. But minutes later, the results returned, and the first twist began to unravel the life they had built. Eli's blood type was O negative, one of the rarest on the planet. Daniel Lusson was O positive. Margaret Lusson was A positive. Neither matched. The doctor looked at them gently, though confusion clouded his face. Are you sure you are the biological parents? It was not an accusation, merely a medical necessity, but the question pierced Margaret's heart. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't speak. Daniel stepped in, voice low and heavy. We are their legal parents, but not their biological ones. Behind the doctor, two nurses paused, the weight of the truth settling over them like dust on old secrets. Eli's siblings, despite trying to rise from their beds, were too injured to donate. Their bodies were still in shock. The doctors refused to take the risk. Time was running out. The hospital made a decision they rarely ever made. A public emergency announcement. The intercom system crackled. The news stations picked it up. Social media flooded within minutes. This is a medical emergency. Anyone in the region with O negative blood, please come forward to Mercy General Hospital. A young man's life is at stake. People flocked to the hospital, hundreds of them, though the chances were slim. O negative was found in less than 1% of the population. Inside the waiting room, Margaret paced in circles, tears streaking down her cheeks. Daniel stood still, staring at the floor, realizing this was the day their entire past would resurface. Far away, over 2,000 miles from the hospital, another life paused. In a quiet town in Ontario, Veronica, now 54, bent over a mop bucket in the office building where she worked as a cleaner. Her back ached. Her hands were roughened from years of labor. She lived quietly, never drawing attention to herself, always keeping the shadows close. The small TV mounted in the hallway flickered with breaking news. She didn't pay attention at first. Cleaners learned to tune out noise. But then she heard it. Rub blood type Ob negative, triplet brother in critical condition, abandoned at birth. Her breath caught. The mop slipped from her fingers. She stepped closer to the screen, her heart thundering as though someone had grabbed it and squeezed. Her vision blurred, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, thinking she was imagining it. But there they were, photos of the Lusson triplets. They looked just like their father. They looked just like her. The reporter continued. Hospital still searching for a match. Time is running out. Veronica pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. A sound escaped her, a sound she hadn't made in years. A mixture of grief, guilt, and a love that had never died. For 20 years she had lived in hiding, changing towns, disappearing whenever danger felt close. She believed abandoning them had saved their lives. But now one of them was dying. And she was the answer. She grabbed her coat, her bag, and rushed out into the cold, the wind slapping her face as she ran toward the bus station. Her heart beat with one truth, one terrifying, overwhelming certainty. If she didn't get there in time, her son would die. After 30 long years, Veronica returned to Minnesota, a place she had fled as a terrified young woman. As the bus entered town, familiarity mixed with strangeness. Old shops were gone, new names replaced the ones she knew, yet the cold wind and quiet streets remained unchanged. She walked past her mother's old neighborhood and turned away from the road to her sister's house. She couldn't face them, not their questions, not their hurt, and certainly not the rumors that had shadowed her disappearance. As she made her way to the hospital, every face felt like an accusation. She imagined whispers following her. That's the girl who vanished. The one who left 3 bobbies by the roadside. The guilt pressed on her chest like iron, stealing her breath. Still, she pushed forward. Her fear no longer mattered. Saving the child she had lost did. Inside the hospital lobby, she blended into a crowd gathered to support the famous Lusson triplets, her triplets. A nurse approached with a clipboard, asking if she was there to donate blood. Veronica nodded, her voice barely steady as she mentioned the rare blood type the boy needed. Ob negative. The nurse blinked in surprise. Veronica was escorted to the donation room, her steps heavy with memories of the morning she left her newborns wrapped in a thin blanket on the cold roadside. As the needle slid into her arm, she closed her eyes and whispered the first prayer she dared utter in decades. Please let this be enough. When the nurse returned with the lab results, her expression shifted from confusion to amazement. Ma'am, your blood is a perfect match. Veronica's breath hitched. Will it help him? She whispered. It might save him. You could be the only match in the entire region. For the first time in years, something warm broke through the darkness inside her. Hope. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth. She had failed her children once. She had abandoned them. But now, at last, she had a chance to save one of them. And in that moment, Veronica felt the first fragile spark of redemption. The hospital corridor buzzed with noise and movement, but Veronica felt completely alone. Her coat was wrapped tightly around her trembling body, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. Somewhere behind the ICU doors, a boy she barely knew, but felt tied to in ways she couldn't explain, was receiving her blood. She had planned to leave immediately after donating, yet something kept her rooted to that hallway, something deeper than fear or guilt. Then a nurse approached. Ma'am, the Lusson family wants to thank you. Before Veronica could escape, the adoptive parents appeared, elegant, exhausted, terrified for their son. The mother held out an envelope, money, gratitude, pity. Veronica's hands shook violently. She tried to refuse, tried to swallow everything she'd buried for years, but the dam finally burst. No, she cried, slapping the envelope away. The hallway fell silent as her voice echoed through it. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed, They are my children." Gasps rippled. The adoptive father stared, stunned. Veronica clung to the wall, sobbing as she confessed the truth she'd never said aloud. She had given birth to triplets decades ago and abandoned them out of desperation. She felt their connection the moment she saw them. She knew. Nurses rushed forward. Doctors stepped out. Visitors gathered. The miracle triplets' supposed biological mother had just unraveled publicly before all of them. "I want a DNA test," Veronica pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please test me." After a tense moment, the adoptive mother whispered a trembling, "Yes." Veronica could barely sign the consent form, her hands trembling so violently. Hours crawled by until the senior doctor finally returned, a file clutched in his hands and a solemn weight in his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Lusson, Veronica, the test is complete." He opened the folder. "The match is 99.98%. Silence crashed over the hallway. The adoptive mother burst into tears. The father leaned against the wall, stunned. Nurses froze mid-step. Veronica collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, years of shame and regret pouring out of her. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she wept. I loved you even then." Her confession filled the corridor, a mother breaking, finally forced to face the past she had run from her entire life. By dawn, the entire state buzzed with a single headline: "Biological mother of miracle triplets found after 19 years." Reporters swarmed the Lusson family. The hospital increased security. Veronica, now exposed to the world, knew she had one final truth to confront: the wealthy Preston family she once worked for, the same household where her life had been shattered. She stood at their mansion gate, trembling. She remembered the rose-scented air, the polished tiles, the chandelier she used to wipe. Nothing had changed except her. She rang the doorbell. The housekeeper let her in. Memories collided with the present as she walked across the familiar floors. In the sitting room, she saw Mr. Preston, the patriarch, now frail in a wheelchair, oxygen tube in place. His eyes widened in disbelief. Before he could speak, heavy footsteps echoed from the stairs. Daniel Preston appeared, the man who had assaulted her at 17. His face paled as recognition hit him like a blow. Veronica steadied herself and told them why she came. She sat before father and son and with trembling resolve recounted everything. Her poverty, the assault, the threats to silence her, the pregnancy he ignored, the plan she overheard to poison her, her terrified escape, giving birth to triplets alone, and finally her desperate abandonment of them. Her words broke the room's silence. Daniel covered his face and dissolved into sobs, confessing he had been cruel, arrogant, and monstrous. His wife stood behind him, stunned. Mr. Preston, voice shaking, apologized for failing to protect a young girl under his roof and for allowing his son to grow unchecked. Tears slid down his face as he whispered the question he feared most: "Are the children mine?" Veronica nodded. "They are your grandchildren." A wave of emotion overcame the old man's shock, regret, and a faint spark of hope. He reached for her with trembling hands. "I want to meet them before I die." Daniel lifted his head, eyes red. "If they'll see me, I want to meet them too." Veronica rose. The triplets were still recovering, she explained. When the time was right, she would arrange it. Mr. Preston nodded as though the promise gave him a reason to keep breathing. Daniel whispered apologies, broken and sincere. And Veronica walked out of the mansion, not as a former maid, not as a victim, and not as a frightened girl. She walked out as a mother who had reclaimed her story and finally brought years of buried truth into the light. 3 days after the life-saving blood transfusion, the hospital room holding the critically injured triplet was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. His siblings sat nearby, recovering from their own injuries but still carrying the weight of fear and confusion. The adoptive parents hovered close, exhausted, yet filled with cautious hope. Then a gentle knock at the door interrupted the fragile calm. Veronica stepped inside, tentative as if crossing a sacred boundary. Her eyes, swollen from sleepless nights of silent crying, searched the room. Her hands were clasped tightly, almost afraid to breathe. The children looked up, their young faces filled with curiosity and uncertainty. They had been told hours earlier that the woman who saved their brother's life was no stranger. She was their biological mother, the one who had carried them, birthed them, and decades ago abandoned them in desperation. The truth hung in the air, heavy and complex, reshaping their world in an instant. Veronica stepped forward, uncertain if she had the right to stand beside the children she had left 19 years earlier. But as the unconscious brother stirred, his eyes slowly opening, he seemed to recognize her, sensing a connection beyond memory. "You're the woman who saved me," he murmured. Veronica broke completely. She covered her mouth and sobbed. "I'm more than that. I'm your mother." A stunned silence followed. Slowly, the siblings approached her. The sister spoke first. "You loved us. You just didn't know how to save us." Veronica's knees gave way. She sank to the floor, overwhelmed, and the triplets knelt beside her, embracing her. For the first time in decades, the children she had abandoned wrapped her in the love she had feared she had lost forever. Later, both families gathered in a small hospital room. Mr. Preston, the patriarch, wheeled in, eyes glistening as he faced the grandchildren he had never known. Daniel, the son responsible for the trauma, stood beside him, weighed down with shame. The adoptive parents were present, balancing gratitude with the heartbreak of revelation. Mr. Preston spoke first, voice frail but resolute. "Veronica, your life was stolen, your safety, innocence, and future, all taken by my son's recklessness and my failure as a father." Daniel bowed his head in silent acknowledgement. The patriarch continued, "I cannot undo the past, but I can restore dignity, opportunity, and peace." He handed Veronica a folder containing a house deed, a trust fund, and lifelong medical care. She stared in stunned silence. "As for you," he said to Daniel, "you will make amends publicly, supporting women and children abandoned or abused as you failed Veronica. You will do this for the rest of your life." Daniel, tears streaming, nodded solemnly. It was not enough to erase the past, but it was a beginning, a doorway to justice, quiet and earned. Veronica approached Daniel and placed a hand on her chest. "I forgive you," she whispered. Weeks passed. As the triplets healed, a new bond formed between the families. Dinners, conversations, laughter, and tears intertwined. Two mothers, one biological, one adoptive, loved the same children in different ways. A father sought redemption. A grandfather embraced accountability. The triplets now had both mothers, a father striving for repair and a grandfather determined to make amends. Two families, once fractured by secrets and trauma, chose to coexist, not perfectly, not without scars, but with honesty, love, and healing.